first one was saying that free labor of cities are often much worse than cities because they have jobs security and promise like also Emerson. And then second one, Emerson says Constitution is biological for us as people because of the young flavors and are used to justify and then depends on the rack with your act. I was like, I know. Oh my God. The Constitution didn't say it was allowed or not, but it said giving the free labor.
I wanted to go to Ready last night and I was like, can I drive myself?
Justin, why don't you over the Explorer? You're not going to talk about because I did. It looks like a burnt marshmallow.
Okay. So, last time I gave you one example of these new short answers. And so the one form of the short answer, at least one of the 4 or 5 short answer questions you'll get on the test, will be something which is just a question and you'll have to answer it like the one we did last time. The others will most likely have a stimulus, okay? And on the stimulus questions, they could be just something to get your brain going, or it could be something where you have to analyze, like these, you have to analyze. And then note that it was kind of almost a stair-step thing again, where you had to analyze 1, you had to analyze 2, but then 3 you were on your own. And you had to come up with something that fit either of the 2 themes in those 2 documents. And the way that I think of it, for you AP World survivors, in a DBQ, the additional document, this is sort of like that. You're basically trying to find some other example, some other evidence that would fit in one of those, into the themes of one of the 2 documents. So when you get to the documents initially, doing some sort of technique like SOAPs or something like that might help you quickly get what something is about, and therefore you could write a quick answer. And no, it's it's asking very, very specifically a question here. Is it asking for a thesis? Is it asking for you to expand? Is it asking for supports? No. It is asking a direct question to which you give a direct answer. And that direct answer could be, kind of one long compound sentence, or maybe 3 or 4 short ones. Should be enough to answer each section or each part. Does that make sense? So 3A, what can tell me what 3A is asking and how you answered it? Who could help us with that? 3A, what is it asking and how did you answer it? Chris.
It's asking what the main point of the first excerpt is.
Right, and how did you answer it?
I said that the main point was that slaves who they didn't commit crimes, they were more than superior to free laborers because they didn't really have the freedom to commit crimes, and that they were better off because they didn't have to provide themselves with homes and sustenance. They got that provided for them. So.
Okay, and so the only thing that I would maybe add to your question or answer is think of a point of view, okay? Is the point of view pro or anti-slavery?
Pro-slavery.
Yeah, and so that might be the only, it kind of came out in your answer, and I thought your answer was fine without that. But if you can throw in a very quick point of view, that would, I think, very much solidify your answer then. And, it's kind of obvious, but, okay. But very good. You got to the point, you got to exactly what it was about, bingo, okay? Did you want to talk about that same one, or?
Yeah, I have mine, you can tell me if it's
Sure,
enough.
sure.
His main point is that slavery is superior to free labor, and therefore the South's lower class labor system should be commended over that of the North.
Yeah, and so you got across that idea, and that idea that I think that they're going for here is it's a pro-slavery document, and then the fact that you added the more than something else is really one of the points that are being made. So yes, I think that's it. Okay. All right. So B, and note that they kind of did something here. One was one way, the other was the other way. So what is who could tell me what is being asked in B and what is being said in B? Both A got both of them on this side of the room, this more heavily, densely populated side of the room. Okay, Izzy, save your side. Okay.
They had to explain the main point of the excerpt by Emerson.
Okay.
And I said he was anti-slavery, and he was kind of saying how the people were hypocrites, and they were manipulating the Bible to justify slavery, and that they need to stop and use their own conscience.
Okay.
Is that right?
All right, and that last part, I think that everything up, and then that last part, that use your own conscience, kind of gets across that last point. Conscience, and another word you might use is moral.
Yeah.
So it's a moral argument against slavery. Okay, so definitely very, very good. So now, the first two parts of this were how were you applying a skill, you analyzing an excerpt, telling what it's about, a skill. Part 3 is knowledge. Okay? Part 3, you're now having to demonstrate knowledge. What would be an additional piece of evidence that would support either of these? Is that and kind of why? Okay, the C. Who would like to tackle the C? Rita.
So I kind of went off of B. I said that Emerson was saying that the Constitution and the Bible were both corrupt and evil because they condone slavery, and so off of this I put the Kansas-Nebraska Act because basically it was to reach a compromise because the Constitution didn't say anything about slavery. So in that way I said that because the Constitution said nothing about slavery, the people were able to do the sort of thing that allowed it through popular sovereignty.
Okay. So okay, so you're reading. So you're so if you the way that you did B allows that C to be a correct answer, if that makes sense. So the person reading it would have read all three of them together, and they would see that there was a consistency in your argument, and I think you would probably get at least those 2 points. Okay. Yeah.
I was wondering if in the second, the thing that Emerson wrote, he's like talking about the beliefs of other people and why they're wrong. So if you're supporting B, could you give an example of like what he's talking about that like
Yes.
so you could give an example
Yes.
of people using the Constitution as an excuse in support of B, even though he's talking about why that's wrong.
I think so. As long as you linked it up, as long as your argument was consistent between the two,
But yeah.
I think you would get that point. I had read it a little more simple.
Yeah.
He is arguing against slavery, so I would look for a piece of evidence that would be arguing against slavery. But I think as long as you were consistent in how you argued B and then how you went to C, you'd get both of those points.
Yeah. Like if for like A, if you talked about the factory like workers and the free labor, like living conditions and like their conditions whenever they're working, are you allowed to like use that as evidence?
So tell me, so what did you foresee then?
I was saying like how they had like long work hours and little pay, and that where they lived was like in like little apartments that they all had to share.
Okay, so I think, but I think that one might be a little bit more touch and go, and here's the reason. I think if you're looking at both passages, the issue is about slavery, and so what I think you would have to talk about in C is something that would relate back to that topic somehow. So if you just stuck to Fitzhugh saying that the conditions were wrong, or were poor, and not bringing up the slavery issue, you may not get all 3 points, because I think the overall question has something to do with slavery in mind. Does that make sense? So to be on the safe side,
So
I would look for a linking idea in the entire question. Does
So
that
like, it'd be better to talk about like the slaves living conditions, I guess.
either slaves living conditions, that could be something,
Like how they,
or
like whenever they like after they finish their work, they could like go and do whatever they want.
maybe. That would, and so that would be kind of a pro type of slavery argument. Or even if you did that thing and then used a piece of evidence for C about the North, but then still related it back to slavery. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So as long as you brought up the issue of slavery in C somehow, I think you'd be okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I think they want you to be relating to an overall theme. Okay? Yeah.
Also, wasn't what she was saying already said sort of in the first excerpt? Because it said you can't use what's already
Yes,
said.
so it would, so if you just said conditions without it being a single new
Oh, no, I
example.
just knew.
So, yeah, so
Yeah.
it would have to provide new information. Okay? All right, so how does this one compare to y'all compared to the other one? Did you like this one a little bit better? It's a little easier? And I think that the majority of the short answers will have this analysis side, and then you just have to bring it up a notch with outside information. But there's definitely going to be one of them which is more based on more showing what you know. Okay? And even on that one, it only seemed like the hard thing was to get the third point, as opposed to getting a 1 or a 2. Okay? So, all right. So how do you guys feel on these? This, I'm introducing this as kind of the new skill for APUSH history this year, besides the stimulus on the multiple choice. I think this one we can handle. For a long time, I think you guys have been shown primary source documents and stuff like that. So this shouldn't be that big of a jump for you to have to do this sort of analysis. Okay. All right, any questions, comments, or concerns? Okay, so I'll keep giving you examples to make sure that this becomes second nature, so that when we get to the test, it's second nature. Okay. All right. All right, so everybody do a deep cleansing breath. All right, so I put out an ambitious goal, but since we're going to have an extra day, I think if we get to emancipation, we'll be good. Okay? So, when last we met, we battled at Fort Sumter, right? Okay. And so the battle at Fort Sumter is going to be the actual beginning of the Civil War. This is when the fighting starts. it will cause Abraham Lincoln to call for 75,000 troops to be brought up from state militias into the United States Army. And that will then cause many upper South states to secede. It's at that point when Lincoln says that he wants troops, and he's obviously going to go on the defensive, that makes it so that Virginia secedes from the Union. When Virginia secedes from the Union, the Confederacy is going to move its capital to Virginia, to Richmond. And that kind of becomes, if you've ever played Capture the Flag, okay? For Union generals, Richmond becomes the great Capture the Flag prize. If we can take Richmond, we win. It was perhaps a simplistic vision of how to win the war, and it might be one of the reasons for the Union not being very successful at the beginning of the war. But the fact that Richmond, Virginia was so close to Washington, D.C., so close, it made Union generals go, if we can just take that, we win. Okay? So, on July 4th, Abraham Lincoln is going to declare that a war against the South is a noble crusade that would determine the fate of democracy throughout the world. Now, this may sound, what? You have to realize that still in 1861, a long surviving democracy, a long surviving republic, is still something not so much in the world. Whether or not democracy could survive as a form of government was still in doubt. The revolutions of 1848 in Europe had kind of shown that, that it was difficult for democracies to kind of even emerge as a form of government in the world. And what Lincoln's basically arguing is that if secession would be allowed, if the Republic of the United States was allowed to break up, it could basically threaten this form of government as a form of government. And so just to make sure that this type of government shall survive in the world, he's got to keep the Union together. Now basically what I'm getting at here is that at the beginning of the Civil War, what is the war about? The Union. So it will eventually be about slavery, and obviously slavery had a huge reason for the war starting to begin with. But for Lincoln early on, to make sure that he had a strong coalition that was willing to fight with him, it was about the Union. Lincoln hoped that he could pull off a George Washington here. Okay? His George Washington moment, just like George Washington crushing the whiskey rebels, okay? That Abraham Lincoln could take the Union Army, okay, crush a smaller Confederate force, and then march on down to Richmond, the new capital of the so-called Confederacy, take it like capture the flag, and voila, you win. Okay? Now at first, it went exactly according to the plan. The United States Army will march into the Manassas Valley, okay, to cross a creek known as Bull Run Creek. There in the Manassas Valley was a smaller Confederate force, and the United States Army, blue-clad army, massive blue-clad army, goes marching into the valley. Okay, they look fabulous. Senators and their wives and secretaries in the cabinet and their families and members of the Supreme Court were picnicking on the hills over this valley, hoping to watch this glorious crushing of the Confederacy. They thought it was going to be entertainment. And again, at first, it was exactly according to plan. The Union Army is marching in. Several small Confederate units look at this massive army marching toward them. They break, they run, they scatter. The Union Army sees the Confederate lines breaking. They let out a great huzzah. They believe that they have already won. They believe the whole thing is over. But there was one Confederate brigade under the command of Thomas. I am not related to that other guy named Jackson. Okay? Thomas Jackson, his unit will look at this marching Union army toward him, and they will stand like a stone wall against the Union advance. And then, rather than breaking and running like some of the other Confederate units, they counterattack. They go rushing toward this superior numbered force, okay? Screaming at the top of their lungs. It becomes known as the rebel yell, okay? And you're a Union soldier, okay? And these crazy people are running at you, screaming, with bayonets on the end of their guns. Oh, what do you do? Run away! It is the Union that panics. It's the Union that is routed by the newly now nicknamed Stonewall Jackson and his Stonewall Brigade, that they shall stand up to the Union Army like a stone wall. You see, when the Union Army was broken up north-south, the South got all the good generals. There was more of a history in the South of serving in the military. That plantation owners, particularly plantation owners' second sons, would oftentimes would go into the army to become leaders. And so when secession came about, okay, many of the best generals in the Union Army went to the South. And this is going to show itself again and again and again in the early part of the war, as the leadership of the Union fails to properly keep their soldiers together. Lincoln realizes that his initial thought was wrong. when he had called for those original 75,000 volunteers, he had brought them into the Union Army for 90 days. Yeah, he thought it was going to be a 90-day war. He thought that everybody was going to be home for Christmas. It was going to be done that soon. He now realizes, that ain't what happened. And so he is now going to call for more. And we get 600,000 volunteers, okay, into the Union Army. The Union Army is now going to become massive. Bringing all of these new people, new bodies into the army, the North is going to bring in a kind of an organizer expert, a general by the name of George G. McClellan. McClellan, when he receives the "you're in charge now," he will write in his journal, "I have been called upon to save the Union, and I shall." He had no doubt whatsoever that he would be the person that would save the United States of America. And when you save the United States of America, what do you eventually become? President. He's got it all mapped out, how awesome he is and how awesome he will become. And he will take an absolutely messy group of soldiers and turn them into the most beautifully marching things you ever did see. Man, did they march nice. They marched in circles, they marched up and down roads, they are the best marchers ever. Anybody who came out to see them could see how well they marched. The one thing they did not march into, however, was battle. McClellan had a case of what Abraham Lincoln called the slows. He always argued, "I'm not ready yet. They need more training. They don't look pretty enough when they march." Abraham Lincoln he starts writing McClellan letters, okay? "May I borrow your army since you're not using it?" Okay? Finally, he says to McClellan, "Do it. You have to go fight." And so McClellan comes up with a battle plan in which he would try and seize, yes, Richmond. Okay? It becomes known as the Peninsula Campaign, as George G. McClellan will march his army, yes, onto the Yorktown Peninsula. Now that sounds like something that hasn't worked out for people before. Anyway, the Union Army will fight its way to the site of Richmond, Virginia. They could see the city. It was there. It was practically within their grasp, when they run headlong into Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee probably would have been in charge of the Union Army had he not resigned from the Union Army. He was a Virginian. And when Virginia seceded from the Union, Robert E. Lee writes a letter resigning his commission, in which he says, "I cannot fight against my native Virginia." He is then given command of the Confederate Army. And this guy was genius. Okay? He will, for years, take a force that was outnumbered, outgunned, outsupplied, and beat pretty much anybody who comes at him. He stops McClellan here. McClellan is forced to retreat. And Abraham Lincoln is forced to reevaluate yet again how he was going to pursue this war. As successful as Robert E. Lee was in 1861 and the beginning of 1862, there still was something that was lacking, a problem. You see, Robert E. Lee always won on defense. You attack him, he beats you. You attack him, he beats you. You attack him, he beats you. What Robert E. Lee had not yet shown, what if he's doing the attacking? And one of the things that the Confederacy needed in order to win the Civil War, think American Revolution. The United States does not win without what? France. The Confederacy realizes they need a France. They need a nation to back up their cause, to be supportive of it. At this point, Europe was pretty much on the sidelines, kind of looking at this fight. They had not recognized the Confederacy as an actual government. The Confederacy needed them to, in order to win. Most particularly, the France that they actually wanted was not France but Britain. They thought that if they could get Britain onto their side, to recognize them as a country, they could win. So Robert E. Lee decides that in order to get foreign intervention and to humiliate the government of Abraham Lincoln, go north and beat the Yankees in Northland. Beat them in the north. Go on offense and beat them there. So he draws up a battle plan. And here's where something kind of awkward happens. One of his generals takes his battle plan and wraps it around his cigars and loses his cigars. And one of McClellan's spies will find it. So before Lee marches north, George G. McClellan knows exactly where he is going to go and how he plans to fight. And so George G. McClellan positions his army perfectly to match Lee's forces. And George G. McClellan will do something that he never had ever done. He stops Robert E. Lee. McClellan stops the northward advance of Lee. He has done something that nobody had done. Lee is forced to retreat. Now, why did Lee retreat? The battle, which took place in Antietam Creek, Maryland, was a bloodbath. It is the single bloodiest day in American history. Okay? More Americans die, and you are playing a little bit here because everybody who died in the battle was an American pretty much. But it is the bloodiest day in American history. More Americans died on this particular day than any other day in American history. Okay? This is not, by the way, the bloodiest battle. There is a bloodier battle that took place over 3 days later in the Civil War. But this is the single bloodiest day. is so gruesome, it is so bloody, it's such a bloodbath, that Lee decides just to save his army, he had to pull them from the field. Now, by the way, the North, far many more deaths, far many more casualties in the battle. But they were on the field when Lee leaves, so who gets the winner? The Union does. It's at that point that McClellan looks at the bloody, gruesome thing before him, sees all the dead American soldiers, and he decides to call it a day. Hey, I stopped him. Woo. But when Abraham Lincoln hears about it, he is furious. The single most vulnerable position you can ever put your army in is putting your backside to your enemy when you're retreating. And what Abraham Lincoln thought McClellan shoulda, oughta done is go after Lee. Press his advantage. Press the fact that Lee was retreating. And he doesn't. He had good reasons. Lots of dead Americans. That's the reason he did it. But Abraham Lincoln says, you're not my guy. My guy would go get him and win. So he fires McClellan despite the fact that he had done something he had never done. He kind of beat. Does that make sense? And can you kind of see what Lincoln's thinking here? In that same summer, Abraham Lincoln had basically abandoned the idea that he could come up with any sort of compromise peace. That there was no way the South was going to just simply come back and rejoin the Union. That the South would have to be beaten into submission. He also realizes that in order for this to happen, it isn't going to be an easy thing. That instead of it just being a war in which armies go off and fight armies, it's going to be a war in which the entire nation shall have to commit itself to the war effort. This idea is total war, which in a sense, a society will mobilize all its resources to the military effort. The second thing that Abraham Lincoln is going to realize at this point is that the idea of we're saving the Union is simply not good enough. That the war, if you're going to win it, is going to have to be about slavery. And this is for two reasons. Reason one, it strengthens your cause. Because if you are fighting to save the Union, it's basically this you can't leave me, I'm going to make you come back. That isn't that strong of a reason to be fighting someone. But it's, you're evil, you have slaves, and you can't have them anymore. That's a little stronger. It gives you a moral case for war. Secondly, war against slavery is this. It recognizes that the resource of the South, the strength of the South, is based upon slavery. And that if you basically say, we are dedicated to ending this thing, you are basically sabotaging that resource. How? Well, people are going to hear about this. And they're going to know that the war is on behalf of freedom, so what are these people going to do? They're going to emancipate themselves. And if once they leave the South, are they a help to the South anymore? No. So part of the total war effort will be a military draft. For the first time in American history, we are going to force people to serve in the military. Now, until about 1863, we had gotten enough volunteers that it was fine. But when volunteering started to slacken off in 1863, they passed what is known as the Federal Enrollment Act. I love the United States government and its 9,000 words for the draft. Okay? Today they call it the Selective Service, in which you have a lottery that you get to get chosen. Then it was, yeah, you want to win that lottery. Anyway, so back then it was the Enrollment Act. We are going to enroll you into the Army. Now, don't get confused. This does not mean that every soldier now is a conscript. Not every single person is being drafted. Think of it more of supplementary. You have 75% of your army made up of volunteers. How do you get the last 25%? Draft. Now, when the Enrollment Act is passed in 1863, it is not popular. It is particularly not popular among American immigrants. Particularly among American immigrants, the Irish. The Irish did not like the idea of having to being forced to fight in the Civil War to give freedom to African Americans, because they believed that should freedom be given to African Americans would come swarming up from the South and take their jobs. And so one of the reactions to the Enrollment Act in 1863 was an anti-draft riot. And what happened in this anti-draft riot is that pretty much Irish Americans in New York will find any African American they can find and beat the blank out of them. Lincoln did not tolerate things that were kind of against his policies very much. He reacted very harshly to draft resistors and really anyone who seemed sympathetic to the Confederate cause. He will declare martial law in Maryland. One of the reasons why he feels that he has to declare martial law in Maryland is Maryland was a slave state north of Washington, D.C. Could you allow Maryland to secede from the Union if it is north of Washington, D.C.? And keep the capital? No. So he declared martial law there. He basically is going to force Maryland to stay in the Union with Union troops. Secondly, he is going to suspend habeas corpus in instances where people were showing Confederate sympathies. In other words, he's going to start rounding up Confederate sympathizers and simply throwing them in jail without trial. Much of what Abraham Lincoln did as far as law enforcement in this way will be found to be illegal by the United States Supreme Court. But they won't find it to be illegal until after the Civil War is over. So in other words, while Lincoln is actually doing these things that the Supreme Court found to be illegal, the Supreme Court basically did nothing. But looking back, after they were done and the war is over, they're going to say, oh yeah, that thing that Lincoln did, yeah, no, he shouldn't have done that. So this happens kind of a lot. The United States government, during times of when we feel threatened, that's when we pass the Alien and Sedition Acts. That's when Lincoln suspends habeas corpus. In World War I, they passed the Espionage Act. In World War II, we round up Japanese Americans and put them into concentration camps. When the government is fearful, civil rights will oftentimes be broken. Even though we had a draft, what was the more thing, what was the bigger thing, were people rallying to the cause of the Union. One example of this was in New York City, where they formed what was known as the U.S. Sanitary Commission. Okay, it's a private entity that was meant to support the American war effort. Now, what the U.S. Sanitary Commission did is it basically was an organization that was dedicated to providing troops with clothing, food, and medical services. And the thing you want to underline the most here, the medical services. This is how most soldiers will be cared for during the Civil War. The U.S. Sanitary Commission recruited nurses and doctors. It largely will help create kind of the nursing profession as we know it today. We believe that this entity will reduce the number of Americans who die of particularly disease during the American Civil War. The comparison is this. Wars that were happening around the same time in Europe, okay? The number of people who died because of disease on the battlefield is far higher at that very same time to the number of people who died of disease on the battlefield in the United States. And we credit the efforts of this agency, this entity, to being the one that is, that is going to be the reason why this happens. But even with this entity out there, nearly twice as many people will die in the Civil War from disease than from combat. And if you're looking for the numbers here, hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands of more people die from disease than the battlefield. All right, so you with me? So, yeah.
Is California fighting in the Civil War?
California is in the Civil War. They are on the Union side, but their location being so far away, what they often did is rather than actually send units, is they sent money, gold, and they paid for recruits from other states to basically fly under California flags. So the California 92nd or something like that might actually be from Massachusetts, paid for from California. Our main role was money, gold. We were still producing a lot of gold at that point. Okay. The biggest thing that we do as far as total war is concerned is the Republicans are going to basically pass economic and fiscal policies which are going to be pretty much dedicated to strengthening the American economy for the war effort. The Republicans will enact what we call neo-mercantilist programs. Neo-mercantilist means government supporting the economy. Maybe the best way to figure out what neo-mercantilist is by saying what it is not. Martin Van Buren would not believe in neo-mercantilist policies. What did Martin Van Buren believe in?
Keeping hands off.
Hands off, laissez-faire. This is not hands off. This is not laissez-faire. This is the government sticking its hands in and saying, economy, do what I say. Okay? It's government involvement. It's government in it. Okay? The first thing they're going to do is they are going to increase the tariff to encourage the domestic industry. Now, how is that for the war effort? Well, basically what you're doing is you're protecting American industry, let's say, to build more guns, okay? So that they are supported, they do not have to compete, they build more. They become stronger, they become more powerful, we build more guns, okay? You protect, leather making, shoemaking industry, so that they can make more shoes. You make it so they can make more money making more shoes. They make more shoes, and you make more shoes. You make more shoes. You have shoes on your army, whereas the South did not have shoes on their army. Okay. Domestic production during the Civil War skyrockets. This will help position the United States to become one of the most powerful industrial nations after the Civil War. Republican policies also boosted agriculture by giving away free land to farmers. This will later become known as the Homestead Act. Now, one idea of the Homestead Act is encouraging settlement of the West by giving away land. But there's a secondary purpose. If you have more people farming on land in the West, what are they producing more of? Food. So guess what the United States Army had far more than the Confederacy? Food. And if you say that an army runs on its stomach, the American U.S. Army, full tummy, whereas the Confederate Army, empty tummy. Okay? This is a huge, huge thing. The United States was now perhaps one of the, maybe even the biggest food exporting country at this point. So not only are we feeding ourselves, we're feeding the world. The Republicans will also implement a nationally financed transportation system. Okay? Linking together the transportation systems of the United States. This is, think the American system, think Henry Clay on steroids. Okay? The biggest prize here is the beginning of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. We start building that railway to the Pacific. We start building that railway to California. Okay? And that one, as it's coming out of the east going west, what was the company that built it? The Union Pacific. That is not an accident. Union Pacific starts building during the Civil War. Okay? No accident in its name. The Republicans are going to pay for all this, partly with taxes, partly with tariffs, but mainly with treasury bonds. The way that the United States financed the Civil War was by issuing bonds for people to buy a bond, okay? And this money that you're in effect saying, buy this bond, I'll pay you back money later with interest, okay? And this money would then go directly to the war effort. The main, in case you want to know about the answer to a question on the test, main way that the war was financed was with bonds. Finally, we have the role of the Treasury Secretary. Abraham Lincoln appointed one of the guys who ran against him at the Republican convention, Salmon Chase. Salmon, my mama obviously didn't love me, Chase. Okay? And what Chase is going to do is talk about Henry Clay on steroids. he is going to take the idea of a national bank, okay, and he is going to create a what we would call the national banking system. He is going to totally take over the regulation of banking in the United States. The power of this system, will later make a New York bank or cause a New York bank to rename itself in Salmon Chase's honor. Okay. Yeah. The Chase Bank is named after Salmon Chase and the fact that he created this national banking system. What's that?
They should have named it Salmon.
Salmon Bank. Okay. That might encourage runs though. Anyway. The other thing that Chase will do. Now this is a minor thing, but it was a thing. Even with the bonds, even with the taxes, even with the tariffs, the United States government still did not have enough money to pay for every single thing that it needed during the Civil War. So what did Salmon Chase do? He just printed money. And he basically says, this money is good. Why? Because I said it is. I'm the Treasury Secretary. It's good money because I, the Treasurer of the United States, says it is. So here, have money, I want stuff. And we, the people of the United States, said, oh, well, the government says this is good money, so it must be. And so we would start at that time with paper money backed by nothing but the fact that Salmon Chase said that money is worth something, okay, as a way to pay for things during the Civil War. It's called a greenback, meaning it's not backed by gold. That's a gold back. Greenback is it's backed by, well, it's green. And you can find it on the back. Yeah.
That's a little fishy.
It's the system.
Salmon.
Ooh! Shoots! Scores! Okay. Okay. Anyway, okay. So, anyway, that is the basis of the system we have today, though. Today, the Federal Reserve notes are only worth money because the government says they're worth money.
So
And-
if we, like, as Americans, reach a consensus that the money was worth nothing, then what would happen?
Dogs and cats sleeping together, total chaos. So, sorry. I think that's a line from Ghostbusters. Okay. All right. Okay, so everybody breathe all that in. So everyone have it in their mind, kind of everything the Union did. Okay? Now let's see what the Confederacy does. Confederates, at first, because of the nature of their country, or so-called country, believed in states' rights. So initially, it was up to the states to do everything for the war effort. That didn't work. And what President Davis is going to figure out is that if we're in a total war thing, the central government needs to take control. So in the Confederacy, they have to result to a strong central government, or attempt to go to a strong central government. What Davis will do is he will use a draft to get more troops for his army. He will just simply use coercion. The government, am taking over your shipyard because I need ships, okay? I'm going to take over your armory because I need weapons. I need food for my army because, well, I need it, so thank you. Basically, he just used the power of the central government to just seize power over things. Now, but running those things, like armories and shipyards, still costs money. And he needs money to pay the workers, buy the materials, okay, import stuff from Europe. Well, the problem is, the Confederate Congress refuses to raise taxes on the things that have any sort of real value in the South. They will not tax slaves. They will not tax cotton. That's the stuff that's moneymakers, and you don't put taxes on it. Where are you going to get the money? Well, you're going to borrow, and then you're going to do exactly what Sam & Chase did, the printing thing, but do it on steroids. I keep using that reference, but this time, where Sam & Chase, the purchases that the United States government made was about 15% of the purchases. Most of the purchases that the Confederate Army will make will be made with money that they simply printed to be valuable. If you're printing money to this clip, to this extent, you're basically making money that is worthless. We have inflation in the South, where prices in 1865 are 92 times greater, okay, than they were in 1861. Your money is basically worth nothing. It's funny money, okay? All right, so how is total war working out between the two? Can you see what the Union did? They created a stronger economy. The Southern economy is based on paper, funny money. No real value, because they refused to tax the things that they had of value at all. Finally, as far as the South is concerned, I want to do a case study on the Southern economy. I want to do a case study on cotton. Okay, so let's talk about cotton and the South. Is everybody caught up at this point? Good? Okay. So, cotton, a case study. The South, in order to win this thing, needs foreign intervention. They need somebody to play the role of France in what they believe to be their own American Revolution. Okay? They gotta have it. They cannot do it on their own. To get this foreign intervention, the South decides to use cotton as a weapon. Okay, everybody kind of think about how effective a cotton weapon might be. Okay? You just got hit with a cotton ball, right? How's that working as far as weaponry? Okay? That is about as effective as what cotton will be for the South. The idea was this. They would try and say to Europe, to Britain in particular, if you don't help us, we won't give you cotton. Okay? We are going to withhold the cotton unless you help us. Their dream, their fantasy, is that Britain is going to go, oh no, don't take the cotton, what do you need? That's what they think is going to happen. The problem is, for one, they didn't actually have the power to withhold cotton, because they're actually having trouble even shipping it to Europe because the North had enacted a blockade. So think about it. Is it the South withholding the cotton, or is it that they actually just can't even get it there? Secondly, what did they need Britain to do? Well, break the blockade so that they could ship them the cotton. Right? We're going to withhold cotton unless you break the blockade so we can have cotton to withhold from you? Okay, so I mean, but they still had delusions of grandeur. They still had this idea that they could use cotton to purchase clothes, boots, blankets, weapons, and I left out the list, the most important thing that they wanted to purchase, food. Okay? Now they had, early on, been able to make one significant purchase. They bought a ship called the CSS, Alabama. And this weapon, this one thing, played havoc on American shipping. The CSS Alabama will sink a whole bunch of American merchant ships. It will make it so that the American shipping economy was one of the weak points in the American economy. But overall, this purchasing of clothes, boots, blankets, weapons, and food turns out to be somewhat elusive to the South. One of the reasons for this is that as the Civil War began, the British had a surplus of cotton. They had in recent years started to find other markets to supply their cotton, like India. Additionally, in 1857, the United States had an economic downturn, and during that economic downturn, the price of cotton bottomed out. And what did British textile companies do when they saw the price of cotton extraordinarily low? They bought it up. And so in 1860, the British had in full in their warehouses, a whole bunch of cotton piled up. And the Confederacy says, we're not going to give you cotton unless you do stuff for us. And British, they didn't need it. Okay. Eventually, when that cotton runs out, and there was all of a sudden a need for cotton in British factories, fortune was not on the side of the South. At that very same time, a really bad harvest hits Britain. They didn't bring in very much food from their farms. And you have this simultaneous thing. A whole bunch of people are out of work, and you don't have a lot of food to feed them. And so what becomes absolute job one? What does the British government have to do? They have to feed their people. And so what becomes their priority? Southern cotton, or importing food from the North, who has excess of food because they've given away all the land and they got all the food and they got all this food. What outweighs King Cotton? Well, King Wheat, but the British don't call wheat wheat. What do they call it? Corn. King Corn dethrones King Cotton. Okay? And so you get this this idea of using cotton as a weapon. Okay? Now just evaporates. But if that isn't bad enough, it gets worse. Because then the Union Army will start capturing Southern cotton as they conquer Louisiana and Tennessee. And so now the Union has cotton. And what is the Union going to do with the cotton? They're going to ship it to England. And so now what is England getting? They are getting both the corn or wheat from the American Union. They are getting the cotton from America, the Union. And so for the South, how's that cotton weapon going for them? Yeah. And then finally, as they're lying on the ground, dead, okay, stick a fork in them. Lincoln, bad teacher. Lincoln will make the war about slavery. And because of books like Harriet Beecher Stowe's, okay, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the fact that Britain had already ended slavery in its colonial holdings, supporting the South, the slavery team, against the North, the anti-slavery team. Not going to happen. King Cotton is dead. So, Civil War obviously is the stuff on the battlefield, right? But can you see how the economics behind the scenes thing is going to play such a significant role in what eventually happens? Okay? So, why don't you very quickly grade the North's total war efforts versus the South's total war efforts. Okay? Very, very quickly grade the North's total war efforts versus the South's total war efforts. Okay, so yeah. All right, so just bring that to a close. Since I want to emancipate. So, grade for the North. Okay, great job, meh job, bad job. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so pretty much pretty solid. Let's see. I'll take a volunteer who would like to defend that the Union did a superior job at total war economy. Yeah.
Well, they had a really strong leader, and they had like all their ideas like passed through, and they had like a good economy compared to the South, which they were just a lot more organized.
Okay, I'll take that. All right. Yes.
They had a lot more support.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
I think like they had a lot more industry. Like before, it was like all the like farms in the South and all the industry in the North, and they would like go back and forth with resources with them like split. Like the North had like could sustain more because they didn't want like diversification.
More diversity. I like that. Okay. All right. So now 1, 2, 3, vote the South. Okay. 1, 2, 3, vote the South. Okay, pretty downer. Okay, so who would like to defend the loser South or explain why the South's a loser as far as economic warfare goes? No one? Oh, come on. You can make me beg. Please. Thank you.
I thought that the biggest reason that it was a problem was because they were wasting money that they didn't have.
Okay, yeah.
Like, the South didn't support themselves as much as, like, target the North. Like, the North supported their troops and, like, tried to mess up the stuff.
Very good, yeah.
They were kind of unrealistic in their mission and goals. Like, they kind of looked at what they saw as important and then immediately thought everyone else would think that was important. But they weren't
A exaggerated sense of self-importance. Okay, yeah.
I feel like they gave into the pressure of the white planters to not tax cotton, and they just took like what seemed the easy way out to print money, but it's not.
Yeah. And another thing that the planters did, the government tried to ask planters to pull up some of their cotton plant production and instead plant food because their army was short on food, and they refused. Because cotton's that important. So, our last story, and hopefully we can get it, is emancipation. Okay? In August of 1862, just as Lincoln had kind of come up with this I need to shift idea, he gets publicly attacked in the New York Tribune. Okay? The editor of the New York Tribune was a guy by the name of Horace Greeley. And he's going to attack Lincoln for the fact that Lincoln had not yet made the war about slavery. Still in August of 1862, Lincoln was saying union, 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 okay? And Greeley knew that it had to be about slavery. Well, Lincoln is going to do something that presidents don't often do. He's going to immediately respond, like letter to the editor, to Horace Greeley. Now I'm going to put up what he wrote. You don't need to write it, just get the gist of it. What Lincoln is going to write, see, get the gist. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could do it, if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. If I could do it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps save this Union. Now, some historians miss the point here. They think that Lincoln's still just saying union, union, union again. But what he's actually done is he's actually brought slavery into the equation as president for the first time. And he's even put out on the table, there are three things I could do. I could do nothing. Okay, I could try and do everything, or I could do something. Lincoln still says union, but he had already decided on emancipation. He had actually decided of the three, option 3. If I could do it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. He chooses option 3 because this is the one that he knows he can legally do. The problem is timing. And why it is a timing problem for Lincoln in 1862 is that by August 1862, what had McClellan done? Nada. By August of 1862, McClellan had lost. And how would it look if you lose, and then you say, yeah, the war's about slavery? What do you look like? Kind of desperate. And Lincoln knows that he can't, if he's going to do this, can he look like he is desperate when he does it? No. Initially, the Union's stand on the issue of slavery was they used kind of a battlefield argument. The South regarded slaves to be property, so the Union turned that against them. They will declare any escaped slave that crosses lines and comes into Union camps as now contraband of war. You can seize from your enemy contraband of war legally. Well, in a sense, the Union is seizing what the South called property, and they're refusing to give it back, effectively freeing these people. Does that make sense? The radical Republicans, radical Republicans would be the ones that are we're against slavery Republicans, are going to use this idea to pass wartime legislation which they believe would break slave power in the United States. Remember slave power. Slave power is the slaveocracy, the power of the slave owners. Radical Republicans would be among the people who most believe that our government was out of whack because of the overly powerful Southern aristocrats. Well, basically what they're going to do is they're going to pass what is called the Second Confiscation Act, which basically will declare any refugee slaves, any slaves that enter into Union camps, as forever free. This is now the policy of the United States government. All you got to do, okay, is get to an American line, and bingo, you're free. What are you basically encouraging now? Runaway slaves. What does that do to the power of plantation owners and things like that if they're now having to worry about any time an American army comes near them, that basically they're almost a freeing thing? Is your system as powerful? Well, Lincoln will build upon this, okay? He will use the Battle of Antietam, which, is it really, truly, truly, truly a victory for the Union? We lost more people than they did, but we did stop Lee. So Lincoln will call it a victory. Why? Because he needs a victory. And he will say that now that we've won in everything, he issues what is known as the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. What the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation did is it gave the South until January 1st, 1863 to return to the Union, or their slaves would be forever free. Now, a lot of people look at that and they go, wait, stop! How can he free the slaves in the place that he doesn't control? It's actually exactly the point. The power that Lincoln is using is his war power. He doesn't have the power to go to Missouri, which is legally in the Union and has not seceded. He can't say to Missouri, you have to free your slaves, because they haven't done anything which would allow him to do it. He doesn't have that power. But if you're in a state of rebellion, now I don't recognize that you're a country because you're just in rebellion. You are part of the United States in rebellion, and because you're in rebellion, I am freeing your slaves. It is the fact that they were in rebellion that gives him the power to do this. Awkwardly. Yes, sir.
So if they
If they had returned to the Union, technically he would not have freed. And this applied. So Tennessee, which part of it had now come under Union control at this point, that area, those slaves were not free. Louisiana, part of that area had come under Union control at that point. That area did not apply. It only applied in places the Union didn't control because they were in a state of rebellion. Does that make sense? Now, the South obviously does not comply. And, yeah, we don't have time for that. Bad teacher. On January 1st, 1863, the slaves in states that were still in rebellion were declared by Abraham Lincoln to be forever free. Now, technically, it's enacted against states that were in rebellion only. But what this act does, what this action does, is it starts what some people call the Niagara movement. Can you basically stop the water from going over Niagara Falls? Once you start going over Niagara Falls, are you stopping?
Nope.
No. It's impossible to stop. And so it sets the tone for what becomes the actual 13th Amendment that would be passed by Congress in January of 1865, one of the last great actions of Abraham Lincoln before he is killed, is pushing this amendment through Congress, ending slavery. But emancipation is only part one of a 1-2 punch. Okay? The second part of the punch is enlisting African American soldiers into the Army. Okay? First, freedom. Second, bringing African Americans into the Army. This is kind of all together the thing that changes everything. You see, what will end up happening is thousands of African Americans in the South will run away. And what will they do? They will be enlisted into the United States Army with the idea of going back down south again, now as soldiers. Okay? And so this is part two. Lincoln now authorizes the enlistment of African American soldiers. Now, at first, Union generals did not think that former slaves, African American, would make good soldiers. They doubted the ability of African Americans to be able to fight. But there was an attack on a fort in South Carolina, okay, called Fort Wagner, in which a unit out of Massachusetts, the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, an African American unit, will ask to lead the charge. The first ones in, you know what that means, don't you? To be the first line in, you're the one that dies. And this unit advances with such courage that basically almost all doubts of the effectiveness of African American soldiers goes away. Now, if you if you want to have a study break, go rent the movie Glory. This event is what is pictured. Okay, this event is what is pictured in that movie. By the end of the war, nearly 200,000 African Americans will serve in the Union armies. Most of them came from southern states. Now just think of that. Think of that. You have so many people that are abandoning serving as slaves and in effect helping the Confederacy by growing cotton or food or anything to support the Confederate forces. And then not only is it a subtraction, but it comes back as an addition. Okay? Additional forces are then brought in against the South. 1-2 punch. Emancipation, okay? Soldier. Changes everything. But it should be noted that in the United States Army we will begin a tradition, I don't even want to call it that, but African Americans will be forced to serve in segregated units. It will remain this way until actually a Southern president by the name of Harry Truman desegregates the military in 1850. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, only during segregated units?
Only served in segregated units. So the segregated units, however, were done this way. They were usually commanded by white officers. They were commanded by white officers. Yeah. No, the Union generals thought